Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Pratham's monthly webinar series on foundational literacy and numeracy. My name is Devyani Parshad, and I will be your host for today. As some of you might know, Pratham turned 25 earlier this year, and this monthly series has been launched in celebration of our journey over the years, but also in celebration of the importance of the topic of foundational literacy and numeracy, which has also been brought out in the new education policy by the Indian government. I'm excited to welcome all of you here today to listen to an engaging conversation. Today's session will have broadly two segments, laying the context of the subject and the purpose of this series. Do share your comments or questions if you have any in the live chat. I now invite the speakers for the first segment of this webinar. This segment is a conversation between Pratham's current and next generation leadership in the context of foundational literacy and numeracy. Let's welcome Dr. Madhav Chavan, the co-founder and president of Pratham Education Foundation. In conversation with Madhav today, we have Samyukta Subramanian and Smithin Brid, two people who have been associated with Pratham for a long time and who've worked closely on our educational programs. Smithin has been with Pratham for over 2 decades, and Samyukta has been with us for over 12 years. Let's hear from them. Over to you, Smithin and Samyukta.
Thank you, Devyani, and thank you for giving this opportunity to talk to Madhav sir specifically. And आज का दिन हम जो focus topic है वो foundational literacy and numeracy है. So before I go to sir and बातचीत शुरू करें, I really want to tell you कि he is a professor of chemistry, and so we would like to understand from you sir कि chemistry सिखाते सिखाते ये literacy का business में आप कैसे आए and उसके बारे में आपकी अब definition क्या है?
वो अगर मैं पूरी हिस्ट्री में जाऊंगा तो आधे घंटे में तो खत्म नहीं होगा ना, तो मैं इतना ही कहूँ कि बहुत साल हुए कि मैं केमिस्ट्री पढ़ाता था. 1988 में मैंने केमिस्ट्री से थोड़ा सा अलग होकर प्रौढ़ साक्षरता एडल्ट लिटरेसी के क्षेत्र में काम करना शुरू कर दिया, और वहीं से मेरी इस तरह के डेवलपमेंट वर्क की शुरुआत हुई. और तब साक्षरता की बात हम लोग कर रहे थे, वो प्रौढ़ साक्षरता की बात कर रहे थे. तब एस्टिमेट ये था कि भारत का लिटरेसी रेट 50-60% के आसपास था. उसको बदला गया थोड़ी दिनों के बाद, लेकिन ये कहा गया था कि अगर हिंदुस्तान इसी तरह से इलिटरेट रहा तो तरक्की नहीं हो सकती. उस समय राजीव गांधी जी ने टेक्नोलॉजी मिशन 7 टेक्नोलॉजी मिशन लॉन्च किए थे. उसमें से नेशनल लिटरेसी मिशन एक था. टेक्नोलॉजी मिशन भी था वो, जिससे आपके कंप्यूटर आए बाद में. तेल का मिशन था, पानी का मिशन था, दूध का मिशन था, बहुत कुछ उसमें था. तो उसमें नेशनल लिटरेसी मिशन जो था, इसको लेकर हमने काम की शुरुआत करी. और तब जो लिटरेसी थी, जब मैं कह रहा हूँ कि अभी 60% के आसपास थी, तो अब जो हो गया है कि अब हम लोग देखते हैं कि 2011 साल में जो सेंसस हुआ, उसमें नेशनल लिटरेसी रेट जो है हमारा, वो 75% के आसपास पहुंच गया था. और मेल लिटरेसी, मर्दों की लिटरेसी जो है, दैट हैड ऑलरेडी रीच्ड अबाउट 84-85%, and women's literacy was about 65%. Now, I think by 2021, if there is a census in 2021, we will find out that हमारा literacy rate अभी 85% के 84% के आसपास पहुंच गया है. और इसका मतलब ये होता है कि उस जमाने की जो लिटरेसी की व्याख्या थी, जो डेफिनेशन था, उसको लेकर हम अब तकरीबन 100% लिटरेसी तक पहुंचने वाले हैं. 10-15 साल में पहुंच ही जाएंगे. तो इसका मतलब क्या हुआ कि 1950 का जो डेफिनेशन था लिटरेसी का, उसको लेके अभी हम एक लिटरेट देश कहलाए जा सकते हैं. लेकिन क्या ये लिटरेसी अभी हमारे सब लोगों के लिए काफी है? उस जमाने में आधे से ज्यादा लोग इलिटरेट थे, वो अक्षर भी पढ़ना नहीं जानते थे. हमारी असर की टेस्ट लेके कहो तो 50% देश ऐसा था जो नॉन रीडर्स था, अक्षर बिगिनर लेटर और वर्ड लेवल के बच्चों की तरह था, जो उसके वो पढ़ भी नहीं सकते थे आसान अनुच्छेद। और आज है कि हम कहते हैं कि सारे सब बच्चे जो हैं, सब लोग जो हैं, वो कम से कम आसान अनुच्छेद पढ़ना सीख जाएंगे। अगर हम लोग इस तरह की लिटरेसी तक पहुंच गए तो क्या ये काफी होगा? तो आज की डिस्कशन में मैं एक मुद्दा उठाना चाहता हूं कि मुझे लगता है, और ये मैं कई सालों से कह रहा हूं, कि जिस लिटरेसी की व्याख्या 1950s और उसके पहले की गई थी, तो वो हमको व्याख्या अभी बदलनी चाहिए। लिटरेसी का डेफिनेशन हमें बदलना चाहिए, क्योंकि अभी जमाना बहुत आगे गया है। व्याख्या बदलनी चाहिए, इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि लोगों को पढ़ना नहीं आने की जरूरत है। पढ़ना आना जरूरी है, लिखना आना जरूरी है, गणित करना भी जरूरी है। लेकिन जब आज की टेक्नोलॉजी हम लोग देखते हैं तो ऐसा लगता है कि सिर्फ पढ़ना लिखना इससे तो काम बनने वाला नहीं, इसके आगे काफी जाना होगा। और कई टेक्नोलॉजी में ऐसी चीजें आ गई हैं कि कुछ लोग बोलते हैं वो पढ़ने की क्या जरूरत है। जब हम लोग 30 साल पहले ये काम करना शुरू किए थे, तब जो अंगूठा है, वो अंगूठा एक निशानी थी इलिटरेसी की। ऐसा कहते थे कि जिनको पढ़ना लिखना नहीं आते वो अंगूठा लगाते हैं। और आज हो गया कि फिंगरप्रिंट्स, आधार सब लेके अंगूठा ही देखते हैं, आंखों की तस्वीर लेते हैं। तो बहुत कुछ बदल गया है, और मैं समझता हूँ कि लिटरेसी की व्याख्या अलग तरीके से करना और उसको लेकर आगे जाना जरूरी है। हाँ, हालांकि हम जो असर का टूल जो है, असर का टूल भी कुछ 20 साल पहले बना था। 20 साल अभी नहीं, लेकिन 18 साल तो पहले बना था। तो अभी हमको इसको भी बदलना जरूरी है कि हम अगर बच्चों की लिटरेसी देखेंगे, तो अभी जैसे अभी हमने 2020 का ये कोविड के दरमियान हमने असर किया, तो उसमें हम देख रहे थे कितने लोगों के पास स्मार्टफोन है, कितने कितने लोग स्मार्टफोन यूज करते हैं। तो अभी तो देखना होगा कि ये लोग हमारे बच्चे जो हैं या जवान लोग हैं, कम से कम क्या ये स्मार्टफोन यूज कर सकते हैं। वो वीडियो तो देखते होंगे उस पर, क्या लेकिन फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी उनके पास है? क्या वो बैंक के व्यवहार कर सकते हैं? तो बहुत कुछ हमको देखना पड़ेगा। बस सिर्फ कंप्यूटर की बात नहीं है। मुझे लगता है कि हमारे आरोग्य की, हेल्थ की भी लिटरेसी का सवाल जरूर आएगा, फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी का सवाल आएगा। तो कुल मिला के लिटरेसी की डेफिनेशन और एक्सपैंड करना जरूरी है, ऐसे मुझे लगता है। मेरे ख्याल में अभी यहाँ पे रुक जाऊं।
तो सर यहाँ मतलब एक छोटा सवाल मैं पूछना चाहूंगा। अभी हाल ही में परसों नेशनल फैमिली हेल्थ सर्वे का भी डेटा आया है, उसमें भी ऑलमोस्ट लगभग जो आप कह रहे हैं उसी तरह की बातें सामने आई है कि कमजोर बच्चों की संख्या, जो हेल्थ वाइज कमजोर हैं, ऐसे बच्चों की संख्या भी बहुत ज्यादा मात्रा में है। एक तरफ महिलाओं के एजुकेशन की भी बात है। तो आई थिंक ये जो सिनेरियो है, इस सब सिनेरियो में ये पूरा बदलता हुआ सिनेरियो है। जो आप 20 साल पहले 25 साल पहले की बात जो कह रहे हैं, उसमें और आज में बहुत अंतर है। तो जो आप आई थिंक बात कह रहे हैं, उसमें जो हमें समझ में आ रहा है वो ये है कि उस जो वो परिभाषा है, जो उसकी डेफिनेशन है लिटरेसी एंड न्यूमरेसी, वो वहां तक ही ना रहते हुए कुछ और आगे बढ़े, ऐसा कुछ शायद आप कहने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, ऐसा मुझे लग रहा है। बट आप इसमें थोड़ा हमें थोड़ा और बताने की कोशिश करेंगे तो और अच्छा रहेगा।
नहीं, जो हम जब कहते हैं अभी कि हमारा देश 85% लिटरेट है, तो इसका मतलब क्या होता है? तो कुछ लोग समझते हैं कि इसका मतलब है कि 85% लोग कम से कम अपना अंगूठा न लगा के सिग्नेचर लिखना तो सीख गए हैं। लेकिन मुझे लगता है इससे आगे बढ़ गए हम लोगों ने, मुझे याद है कौन सा ईयर था, आई डोंट रिमेम्बर विच ईयर इट वाज, आई थिंक इट वाज अबाउट 2010 और समथिंग, व्हेन वी actually looked at how many women or how many mothers
जी
could read the simple paragraph, and I think we came up with we came to the conclusion that the national literacy mission, or the national literacy rate of 55% or something for women, was the same as what we got. So the women in the household were also asked to read. So clearly this literacy exists. But as I was saying earlier, that definition of literacy is not sufficient. And we were not measuring any other kind of literacy. For example, we did not measure whether the women knew how to take care of their children, or men for that matter as well.
Right.
We have not checked whether if somebody can solve a problem, a mathematical sum, that is okay. But we've not checked whether that person can actually take care of his or her bank business. Now everybody is supposed to have bank accounts. You should be able to make payments on your cell phone.
Indeed.
So we are teaching people to do all these things, or at least we are saying that they should be able to do these things. But are we actually helping them learn those things? Do we know the consequences of what we do on the digital devices? So that is as far as the digital technology is concerned. But beyond that, there are many other things that we had not actually paid attention to, which we need to do. So health is one thing I talked about. Nowadays, the question of mental health has been coming up. We have neglected mental health completely, and India is now supposed to be number one in people dying by suicide. So there are many kinds of things that are going on, and we have not paid attention to that. So only reading, writing, and arithmetic is not going to be enough as literacy in the future.
Yeah. If
So
I
I
can
think
just
at this point, sorry, before Samyukta you asked, I think the point that he's making, I feel जो policy अभी आई है, policy में फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी एंड न्यूमरेसी का मिशन बनाने की बात आई है. कुछ सालों पहले एक्ट भी आया था, एजुकेशन एक्ट आया था. सो व्हाट डू यू थिंक फ्रॉम दैट पर्सपेक्टिव कि वो पॉलिसी अब कह रही है कि अब फोकस करो लिटरेसी न्यूमरेसी पे, एंड जब आप नाउ यू आर सजेस्टिंग कि उस लिटरेसी एंड न्यूमरेसी की डेफिनेशन को बदल के लर्निंग, फाउंडेशनल लर्निंग के डेफिनेशन को बदलो, तो हाउ डू यू सी दिस?
No, see, first of all, I hope people don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying it is not necessary to learn to read, write, and do basic arithmetic. I think it will be necessary. That is a component of all the literacy that we need to acquire. Without that, learning many things is just impossible. If you can't read, actually, the moment I said that, I realized that may not be true. So, but actually, it is still true that if you can read, if you can't read, then you will not be able to understand many things that are to be learned. That is still true. So you have to learn those things, right?
Right.
So the question is that is not enough.
No.
Now, when the national education policy talks about foundational literacy and numeracy, that is the agenda, unfinished agenda of the past 50, 100 years, which we have to complete. But what I'm saying is, let us not be limited to that. We need to go beyond that. Otherwise, we'll be chasing new targets for the next 100 years. So we need to, as people say, and this word was very popular 10, 15 years ago. Now I don't hear it as much, that we need to leapfrog. We need to go beyond. And here I will say, I will contradict myself when I said that people should be able to read. Now, a friend of ours, a very high up person in Google, was telling me that he doesn't read books anymore. He just hears books. So when he's driving, he says his commute to work takes about 30 minutes. So in the 30 minutes, he plays books on his radio, and he plays it at some 60% or whatever, faster than normal speed, and he can hear and understand, and he learns that way. Now, this is something completely new, and this is very interesting. You know, when books were created, they were not meant for blind people. Then Braille was invented, right? The Braille script. But now today, we are able to talk to the digits, and the digit is supposed to talk back to you. If I say, read out lesson number 6 from the NCERT textbook for standard 6. This is now entirely possible that you can tell the machine to read it out to you. So is this not possible? So the whole idea, but giving this instruction itself requires a lot of understanding. So I think what we have to do is we have to complete the agenda that is unfinished, true, but we need to learn to do many things beyond what the basic literacy numeracy is. And so, as you said, this is not about foundational literacy and numeracy, but it is about foundational learning. And foundational learning can involve many things, and it's not just literacy and numeracy. That is where we are.
Yeah.
Sanyukta, you were saying something.
Yeah, Madhav, I was just coming in here to say you're talking about today's India and tomorrow's India. And when you talked about mothers' literacy, I remember last year we had done this early years ASER. So mothers of children who are aged 4 to 8, more than 65% of them have studied beyond grade 6. And those are the mothers we are talking about when we talk about a huge percentage of youth in this country, and mothers who have been to school for many years, and we can assume they are literate. So where do we see parents, mothers, communities coming in this, in let's say the next 25 years?
But see, if you look at our survey during the COVID times, what came through was schools were closed. Teachers could not meet children, although it seems like they visited children wherever possible. But the parents played a very important role in somehow keeping the children going. I mean, they had no choice. The children were there and the parents were there. They could not leave each other. So the parents did play a significant role. You may remember that many years ago, I started talking about changing Pratham's tagline from every child in school and learning well to every child not in school and learning well. And I thought that was half a joke at that time. And suddenly it came true. Every child was not in school and not learning well either. So how are we going to handle this? So actually this pandemic has started asking this question. Can we do without the institution of school as it is? Or do we need to modify the way we have organized our education? When this school was born, or the idea of a school, even before this formal school came through, children were learning. But at that time, the number of educated, so to say, educated or literate persons even, was very, very small. So in a whole village, there was one learned person, and that person was the teacher. But today, as I said, literacy rates have gone up. People know so much. There are so many things going around, right, wrong, fake, or true. And there is so much knowledge floating around. So why is it that there is one specialist or one institution that is a specialist for education? I think this is something that we should be thinking about. The whole process of learning and passing generational knowledge, or even creation of knowledge for that matter, cannot be limited to certain institutions and certain people alone. We need to start looking at developing a new form of the education system. Or maybe the system will come much later, but at least learning clearly learning has changed. And you may say it doesn't, but I suppose it is true. It's incredible if you go to YouTube and start looking for recipes, how many hundreds of thousands and millions of people are looking for the simple things that are cooked in the homes. What are people doing? The amount of learning that is going on, and you may call it informal learning. And then the question is, how is informal versus formal now? How important is so-called formal learning? You multiply a 3-digit number by a 3-digit number. Who does that ever? Nobody does it. If you have to do it, you'll pull out your computer or your calculator and do it on your calculator, on your smartphone, or on your regular phone for that matter. So things are changing dramatically, and yet we are stuck with the same old things. So I think it's important to understand the logic of mathematics. First time, it was always important, but nobody taught it. We were too stuck, learning the mechanics of mathematics. But now I would say the logic of it is much more important, and it always was, but now it will give us that realization.
Yeah. But it sounds to me like you're talking about connecting what we do in terms of building foundations with the skills that will be relevant in the coming few years. So do you think there's like a disconnect there, like what we're trying to do in the name of foundational literacy and numeracy, and what we actually need to do?
No. Again, I don't want to mislead, and I do not want to endorse anything that says we have to go away from foundational literacy and numeracy. Let us understand that foundational literacy and numeracy is extremely important. Let's not downplay the importance of it, because otherwise everything get derailed. Now, while you are teaching, how to teach is a question mark, and you can modify that. The skills that we require tomorrow but these are skills of learning. So focus on those skills of learning. That is true. And that you can do when you're teaching the basic foundational literacy and numeracy as well. Right? I'm just worried that you may be telling people that I'm saying literacy and numeracy is not important. That is not true.
No, we have spent 25 years. We have spent 25 years to make this agenda that, this is very important. So we will definitely not say that. We want to make sure that every child in India is able to read fluently and solve basic arithmetic. But
Yes.
the point that you're bringing right now at the right stage, I think, is, it is also related to the children's aspirations, families' aspirations, because the skills that you're talking about, the definition of redefining of learning that you're talking about is really important at this stage when the technology is so advanced. So I think how to build these three blocks together, like जो पुराना baggage है हमारा वो काम भी हमें खत्म करना है, but at the same time we have to cope up with the new technology and deal with this all sort of aspirations, livelihood. So वो उसका भी हमें ख्याल रखना चाहिए.
Yeah, but Smritin, what worries me here is the technology bit. Like especially in the last 1 year, we've seen that there are those with smartphones, there are those we can reach out to through phones, and then there are those we simply are not able to reach out to. So is it going to be like this huge gap where anyone who's digitally savvy gets it all, and then there'll be a whole group of people who will just miss out on this whole road? Is that a danger?
There will be that danger. That always was. Those who had access to books and who could understand books went ahead, and those who did not have access to books, access to knowledge, or who could use the knowledge, who could not use the knowledge, got left behind. That was always there, and now it's getting even worse, because much more knowledge is going to be available on the technology platforms, and those who can't access it are going to be left far behind. Because those who can access it will go further, much further ahead. That is a problem, and that needs to be tackled. But there is another thing, and before we end, I want to make that point, that we really need to think in terms of our livelihoods and these aspirations that Smritin was talking about. That we have to figure out this whole business of sustainable change, the environment. Everything is coming to the fore. This was not there before. Even as far as jobs and aspirations are concerned, there was a lot of talk, and still is, about vocationally oriented, job-oriented education.
Yeah.
But if you look at the numbers in India, out of a 130 crore population, only 50 crore are working people or in the productive force. 50 crore only. The others are either too young or too old, and they are not a part of the workforce. Out of these 50 crores, some 7-8 crores only have salaried jobs. All others are self-employed or working, agricultural workers and so on and so forth. Which means that most people, 100% people, will go through school and they'll be told that you will learn this. If you learn this better, then you will get jobs. But actually, those jobs will not be there. But you need to learn agriculture. You need to learn many other things about how to make your own life sustainable, how to make your own land sustainable. So there are many things to be learned to build our own lives. And those have to become a part of our education. And for that, how do we develop an education system? Our education system today somehow says after 10th standard, if you don't learn, that's fine. After 12th, you don't learn, that's fine. After graduation, you don't learn that. And there is an end to education. But the idea of continuing education, lifelong education, was always there. And today the tools are there that can actually bring this into a reality. That continuing education, lifelong education is entirely possible today. It's a question of how we organize it.
Yes. And I think with that, we only have so much time. But I think two things that you really brought out for us right now. One, that learning continues across a lifetime, beyond schools, in communities, across our lives. And that it is about creating, building, and passing on knowledge to the present generation, something that's relevant, useful for them. And that's how we need to think about foundational learning as a whole. So we're going to move back, I think, to Devyani. And in the next segment, we're going to grapple with how are we going to lay out, open out this whole concept around foundational literacy and numeracy that we just started the conversation about. Back to you, Devyani.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samyukta. Thank you, Smitin. And thank you, Madhav. It was a pleasure listening to that conversation. And I'm looking forward very much to the next segment. So for our next segment, we are going to continue the conversation with Suman Bhattacharjea from ASER Centre, along with Rukmini Banerji, who is the CEO of Pratham. And we also have two guests with us, which is Venita Kaul and Sunisha Ahuja. So welcome to all of our speakers. Just to give quick introductions to our guests for today, Venita Kaul is an academician. She was associated with Ambedkar University as professor and director of School of Education Studies and was the founder director of Center for Early Childhood Education and Development at Ambedkar University. Professor Kaul was a senior education specialist at the World Bank for over 10 years, and before joining the bank, Professor Kaul served in the NCERT for over 20 years. Welcome. Our next guest is Sunisha Ahuja. Sunisha is an education specialist with UNICEF India. With her education background in child development, she has worked on thematic areas of early childhood education, early literacy, and reading promotion in primary grades. She has also worked with the Ministry of Education and several nonprofits, including Mobile Creche, Care India, and Room to Read. In the different roles that she has performed, she has led program development, provided technical assistance, conducted professional development programs, and managed large projects and fundraising activities. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I will now hand over to Suman to take the conversation forward.
Thank you very much, Devyani. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second segment of today's session. As we were thinking about this seminar series in FLN, as Devyani mentioned at the beginning of the session, the idea for this series came from Pratham's own history, long history of working with young children, as well as this moment, this important moment in terms of the objectives of the new national education policy, in terms of ensuring that every child acquires these foundational skills. But as we thought about how to structure these sessions, we thought it would be very good if we could collaborate with other people in this country who are experts in this field, but who have different backgrounds and trajectories, and so bring different perspectives to bear on this very important subject matter. And of course, we could not think of two people more suited to this task than Sunisha and Venita. So welcome, both of you. Thank you very much for joining us as we embark on this journey. We have had, the four of us, a little bit of discussion in the last few weeks about how we want to structure this series going forward. And as you know, the idea for today's segment, we don't have a lot of time, but what we thought we would do is to broadly lay out what we're thinking about in terms of this series of sessions. What is the content that we think is important to address? What are the lenses from which we think we might want to address that content? And then also a little bit about what is the kind of structure that we can come up with that will enable us to create a forum that is not just a lot of people listening, but to try to create a forum that really is engaging, is vibrant, does encourage discussion and participation. So those are sort of the broad pieces of today's discussion. And I thought maybe we would start with you, Venita, this evening, in thinking about the content for the at least the first few sessions of this series. Now, we've just heard Madhav tell us about how it's not enough just to think about foundational literacy and numeracy. Sure, those are very important skills, but we need to think beyond that as well. And you, I know, have many years of work and thinking about the kinds of skills and competencies that children need to develop in order to get even this far, to develop this sort of solid foundation. That is not only about reading and writing and arithmetic. So do you want to share your thoughts on what this series of sessions could contribute to this debate around what are those skills that young children should acquire? So over to you.
Thank you, Suman, and I would like to congratulate Pratham for his completion of 25 years, because it's the honor of that we are having this webinar series. I think that Madhav's, the interview with Madhav has kind of laid down the broad parameters of what this webinar series should really reflect on. I see that so far as the concern that was brought out in that first segment, which is very, very important, I think I would like to reiterate that there is a need to look at this whole foundational learning, both from conceptually, if we look at it both vertically as well. There was a lot of stress on the horizontal part of it in what Madhav had said, which I fully agree with and endorse, that somewhere we have to move beyond literacy and numeracy in the definition of literacy and numeracy in that narrow, limited way that it is in terms of how many letters or words or passages that the child is able to read or to do basic sums, or even to identify numerals. I think we have to move beyond that to looking at the whole foundational skills to be more in terms of learning skills early. So I think that one of the concerns is that the mission also has been it's conveying a very narrow concept of the whole idea of early learning or the foundational learning by limiting itself in the nomenclature to foundational mission for literacy and numeracy. I would say that it should be about early learning, literacy and numeracy, and look at this horizontally in a much more comprehensive way in terms of not just the basic skills of reading, writing and numbers, but also being able how to use those numbers to be able to lead a much more productive life and contribute to society. So somewhere those skills require, which would take a person beyond just the immediate to be able to do critical thinking, to be able to really seek more knowledge for himself or her knowledge herself. As Madhav said, there's a need for much more of being, that I just go back to the 4 pillars that were mentioned by UNESCO many years back under the Delors Commission report, which said that the aim of education is not just literacy and numeracy, but it is about learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. So it's more about learning to know. It's not about knowing. And so how do we learn to know? By using these skills. So somewhere I think how this can be done is by focusing on the how of the processes that are going to be used in the teaching learning processes that are going to enable children to be able to understand all this much better. And talking about vertical, I would talk about the need to address the entire continuum in foundational literacy and numeracy, which is from early childhood on to the primary. And that is one of the major reforms that the policy is really making, recommending. But unfortunately, the bifurcation of pre-primary and primary is still continuing. I think somewhere the need to bring this into a continuum and have a upward continuum of curriculum is something that I would really like to emphasize.
Thanks, Venita. I think anybody who knows you understands that you are have been for years now very ardent supporter of this idea that the continuum is really important, that we can't just be talking about what you need to do at pre-primary level, what you need to do at the primary level, but to think about this as a process that begins early and continues into the primary years. Sunisha, would you like to add to what Venita said in terms of the importance of learning skills, but also in addition to adding to what Venita was talking about, can you reflect a little bit on what sort of lens do you think, as a series of sessions in this seminar series, what sort of lens do you think we should take in terms of where to focus our attention? So if you're talking about learning skills, we could look at the theory, we could look at the research. What does the research tell us about how children learn? We could look at policy, we could look at institutional structures, we could look at how all these things are implemented on the ground. So there are different levels at which we could focus our attention. Now, of course, all of these things are important, but do you have a vision in terms of, for this series, since we will have to make some decisions about where to start and how to address some of these questions, how should we go about this? Any thoughts?
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Pratham and the team at Pratham for having completed 25 years, and best wishes for the next 25 years moving ahead. In terms of, as we've had our earlier conversations, Suman, with Venita ji and Rukmini, I think, like you just laid out, there are a lot of elements or components through which we could be looking at, which could be addressed as part of this series of discussions that we plan to hold now, starting today. And I feel that, in terms of one, definitely, I think the one point that Venita ji pointed out, which is also a significant recommendation of the NEP, is the whole piece around the continuum. I think all data is telling us that children don't necessarily follow the trajectories that the policies lay out. Children are, moving back and forth between ECE programs and early grades. I think while globally this is a recognized kind of stage of learning for children, we haven't discussed this enough here in India. I have at least not come across a lot of research to tell us. So for example, we look at this whole piece around school readiness. Now, the way school readiness has been kind of understood, it has sometimes also led to the downward, moving off the curriculum. And when we talk about school readiness, there is also this whole concern that we are trying to formalize the curriculum for children at that age of 5 to 6 years. And is it only that children need to get ready for school? How do schools get ready for children? How do families get ready for a different stage of learning that children will transition from an ECE program to a more formal, structured kind of a primary classroom? I think these are questions. We need to kind of look at some examples around it, and I would kind of urge for us to kind of look around for or call for requests from people who are practitioners who have experience around this to share with us. One, how do they see the continuum in terms of the curriculum being in a continuum? And two, in terms of looking at how do you support children in making that transition from one program to the other? Because the realities are that it is not necessary that a child may be in that same school doing the early childhood education program and moving into grade 1. We know that children come from different kinds of programs. It could be Anganwadi centers, it could be private play schools. So what is that kind of, how do you support that transition? I think that's one thing that I keep thinking about, and I would like to understand that more, and I hope we can get some research around that shared here to look at certain practices that are maybe happening either within India or maybe invite people, global experts to come and talk about it. And another area that actually that I feel very strongly about is this of the capacity building of human resource for this kind of programming that we are thinking of. If you're looking at this entire continuum, do we have those kind of programs? Do we know what we need to kind of programs do we want to organize for people who will work with that age group of children? So these are some things that come to my mind, Suman.
Thanks very much, Suman. Rukmini, as somebody who, at least in ASER Centre, is famous for being able to summarize complex content in one page. There are a lot of domains that are of interest here and that are relevant to this whole discussion of the early years and the early years continuum. And Sunisha has just mentioned research, examples from practitioners on how best to support children, capacity building. There are many other elements. What for you would be sort of that, if you were to distill this entire landscape into a one-page note on what are the key elements here that you would like to focus on, at least for the next few sessions of this series, what would those be?
That's a tough one after all these experts have spoken to ask me to do. But just before this session that we are having, I was in another group. This is a group that has been put together to think by the Delhi government to think about what should be whole set of changes and reforms that they want to do. And we spent probably an hour just before this one really talking about some very basic questions to which it seems like the answers need to be sorted out. So number one, what age should a child go to school? Especially what age should you enter school in first standard? We have a law, states have different recommendations, and the actual reality in the ground is very different. But it seems like a very fundamental organizing principle for an education system to say at what age should you enter when. So this is just an example to say that I feel like in the last some months, especially since the new education policy has been launched, that we are, in every conversation you have, there are these questions that are coming up, and there are a whole variety of answers and whole varieties of ways of getting to the answers that we need to put on our plate. So I'm not summarizing because I think that will be a hard thing to do, but it looks certainly like if I take what Madhav and Venita said, and I really like, Venita, the way you put it to say well, in the beginning, I think what Madhav said was to say, we need to think about foundational learning, which means we need to think about what is foundation and what is learning. Venita added to that by saying you need to think about it in a horizontal way as well as in a vertical way. And I think at least for this second session, although we may not have explicitly said it, I know that Venita and Sunisha and both Suman, you and I, were thinking that there's one big piece which is in these early years, but how do you take this from age 3 or 4 into primary school? So even for that section, which I think is a huge opportunity for the country, from what Sunisha says and what you said, I'm taking away 5 things. One is that there's obviously a lot of thinking to be done about what is this breadth of skills that we want to grow, which is called curriculum, teaching, learning activities, famous word now in many circles, learning outcomes, all that kind of thing. How do you think about that as a continuum? But I think there are many less visible things, but even more important perhaps in laying this layer out in the country, which have to do with institutional arrangements, which have to do with how do you finance these things. Somebody asked me the other day a very interesting question, that if the per child cost of a first standard, a per child cost in first standard is so much, what should the preschool cost be, particularly if it's in the same compound? Should it be half? Should it be 1/4? Should it be equal? And I think we haven't done these kinds of calculations to say what should it be and what do we have. So we need the thinking on the teaching learning part. I think we need the learning on the institutional part. I think we need the learning on how much resources are going to be needed, whether it is money, whether it's an extra teacher, whether it's in the extra teacher in the Anganwadi or the extra teacher in the pre-primary grades. I think we have a huge amount of work to think about how do you bring parents into this picture. It's clear, and Madhav mentioned this in his comments, that the COVID, parents have always helped, but I think the COVID crisis has just made their contributions much more visible. And at this age group, especially the early years, I think engagement of parents and family members is absolutely critical. You can't go about giving a curriculum to parents for themselves, but how do you really create a whole a platform on which people can come together? And then I think across all of these, there is what do we have in place today? What do we know about what works? And where do we want to be heading? So I was thinking when people before me were speaking about a 1-page grid, but I think it needs to be 3 or 4 dimensions on that 1 page. And I'm not sure with all this technology how one creates that. Maybe it's a 3D printing note of what we need to do. But one of the reasons to have this series is, I think, and I think Sunisha, Venita, and Suman, you'll agree that between us, we've had really interesting conversations. And outside of us 4, I think each of us and many more people are having exactly similar deep conversations. So how do we bring the best of these conversations so that we can all, not just us, but there are many people who are listening, and hopefully in the days to come, many more people who will participate. What gives me a lot of enthusiasm and energy is that when we spoke about this series, when we shared the information with people, there were so many responses. Many people called and said, let us know how you're going to shape this. We can participate, we can contribute. Even today, I had very enthusiastic, responses. So we've just begun. I don't think my, attempt at a 1-page summary even does justice to all the things we need to think about. And I'm constantly reminded of when we were doing ASER 2019, which was focused on this age group 4 to 8, and we were in different villages. As the activities were being done with the families, with the mothers and the children, so many times mothers turned around and said, "हमें तो ये पता ही नहीं था कि ये बच्चे के इस उम्र में ये सारी चीजें होनी चाहिए." So I think that the whole exercise is, as a country, for us to say कि हमें पता करना है और हमें करना है ये सारी चीजें, whatever those relevant things are, that will be really necessary कि हमारी नींव अगर इतनी मजबूत हो जाए, then all this learning, whatever crisis and whatever it is that we see, वो होनी ही नहीं चाहिए. And we can, as a system and as a society, focus on the kinds of things that Madhav is indicating about how do you learn to learn, how do you really think about. I loved Venita. I had forgotten about these 4 pillars about learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together. And there are so many other ways in which our foundations need to be in place. And I think that this new education policy and the opportunity it provides is a way to really start focusing all our attentions on those kinds of really critical things for the growth of children.
Thanks, Rukmini. There are some really interesting questions coming in from the audience, but we are almost out of time already. This has gone by really quickly. So I don't think we can take audience questions, but I do want to ask each of you, because of what we want to create here as a forum where people can engage, can share experiences, can discuss whatever content we are going to be focusing on in the upcoming sessions. What are the other mechanisms that we can use, do you think? Because Zoom calls, while the advantage is that we reach a lot of people, it is very difficult to really engage in depth around any of the content. So are there other suggestions for mechanisms that we can try to implement either before the session, during the sessions, or after the sessions, so that we can really create something that is a forum for really engaging with the content that we want to share and discuss? So Sunisha, would you like to go first, or any of you actually, whoever would like to start?
Venita ji, if she'd go first. Yeah.
Venita, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it, but just thinking on my feet, I think that it is I think there are many questions, many challenges, many conflicting ideas and experiences around foundational learning, which need to all come together somewhere to be able to be collectively looked at, examined, learned from. So one way of doing it is perhaps, which will be a lot more work for Pratham, is to sort of invite people to come up with what are the relevant questions which they think that need to be tackled or discussed in this forum, and then break out. I mean, and then sort of apportion these to each of the webinars by inviting some of those people come in and discuss it, and having a mix of people, not just those who have proposed those questions, but also others to come in and have an interaction. So that could be one way of doing it, to be able to make it more customized to what are the areas of interest and new learning that need to be identified.
Thanks, Venita. Sunisha?
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, one understands that there are limitations of Zoom calls and to have those deep conversations. But I think what we could be thinking of, depending on all the various kinds of themes that people are interested in discussing, to maybe ask people to sign up for those themes that they are most interested in, taking conversations further, and organizing more small group conversations, which could be where people share experiences, images, videos, papers, what they may have. And I'm just wondering whether, we should try and put together a platform where many of these things that people will bring to such discussions could be hosted, so that if someone wants to go there and listen to that conversation, or if we bring in some experts to come and talk on a specific topic, we can record that as a video so that people can go back and listen to that and watch that video as and when it suits them. So let's kind of look at all of these various ways of engagement, and maybe create a repository, so that which anybody can access, and it's in the public domain.
Thanks, Sunisha. We have about 2 more minutes. So, Rukmini, in addition to answering this question, if you want to just quickly, because it would be nice to let people know a little bit about what we're thinking about for the next session, just because we would like everybody to come back. The next session is on the 21st of January. So just based on the discussion we've had today, what would you think would be a good next session? You said a little bit about this earlier, but if you want to say a little bit more about what specifically we were thinking the next session should be about. So both in terms of mechanisms to encourage more participation, discussion, and as well as a little bit more on the next session.
Obviously we need to have a little bit more discussion about what the next session should be. But I do think that just as an example, if the next session was to talk about the available research, at least in terms of the continuum, I think we have a lot of research perhaps available on different pieces of this. But if you had to think about this continuum and about children's progress on this continuum, what is the evidence? What is the research? What are successful models? Somebody has asked about successful models on the questions. Is there? This is just an example, but if the next time's topic and broad theme is announced, I think people could send in things that they think should be in that national repository that Sunisha is talking about. And we could also have potentially questions that come in advance that could be addressed in that discussion. We've had these questions about 1 hour, whether it's too short or it's sufficient. Structuring the 1 hour into 2 segments may give too little time to each segment, but we should certainly have some preparatory reading discussion that leads into the discussion of on the day of the seminar, and as well as something that can be done beyond it. So that as I think Venita said, it's not just that one day that some people come together, but there's some lead up to it, and then there is some follow through, and then there is something that can be placed in a repository in some kind of an organized fashion, to which again, then you can keep adding on to it. So my preference would be to say, what do we know about the continuum? What do we know about children's progress across the continuum? And maybe do a small, kind of a summary almost, and let that be out there for people to read or look at, and then have a certain focus to the discussion that addresses different aspects, perhaps, of children's progress on that.
Thanks, Rukmini. I'm afraid we're out of time. It just feels like we barely started, but we're going to have to stop for today. I hope everyone who's been watching and listening has been putting in comments on the chat. We will also be sharing a feedback form right after the session, so that we would really like suggestions, comments, themes, topics that you would like to discuss in these sessions. So please do let us know. As you can see, the structure and content of these sessions is a work in progress. And we would like very much to strengthen our own planning and thinking on the basis of all of your suggestions and your thoughts. So with that, thank you all very much. And thank you, Sunisha. Thank you, Venita, Rukmini, and Devyani. Back to you.
Thank you, Suman. Thank you for a very nice session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. A big thank you to all our speakers for today, and a special thank you to our guests for joining us. You all have been watching on YouTube, and we hope you have used the opportunity to share your comments and your questions in the chat. We will be able to collect them from there to inform future sessions. But before you go, we would like to remind you to please share your feedback, and of course share any ideas, questions, suggestions you may have with us. As Suman mentioned, this is the feedback form. You will also find it in your chat. It's bit.ly/feedback FLN-Form 1. So if you're not able to find it in the chat, quite easy to remember. Please do give us your feedback. Apna feedback zarur dijiye hame is form mein. And we look forward to seeing you on the 21st of January for the second session. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.